Should you let your players play evil characters? This video discusses that controversial topic. The Godfather, The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, Black Sails, and House of Cards are all examples where the most interesting characters are evil. It says, according to Wikipedia, Cyberpunk focuses on high tech and low life. I find an interesting and somewhat disturbing trend among a lot of game masters or dungeon masters in the role-playing genre. They don't want to let players play evil characters. I was reading something today where the guy goes, "Oh, just kill them off." And he says, and I heard another, somebody blogging about, "Oh, you shouldn't let them because they will kill each other." And I go, no, I've done this. I've played evil characters. I started off with original Dungeons and Dragons, and it was not unusual for parties to play evil characters. And did I prohibit player versus player combat? No, not at all. Actually, there were times when I encouraged it. It got fascinating and interesting to see what was going to happen. The difference is that you have to plan for letting things happen. That the party they squabble over who gets the magical sword, and that may come to blows. Well, so he says we're talking about a fantasy campaign where just because you're dead doesn't mean they can't be raised again. I mean, it's it's not quite as bad as what was it, the classic or infamous scene in Dallas where it was all a dream for an entire season. But what happens is that characters can fight and compete with each other. You look at the standard concept of a drug or a criminal organization. Characters stick together not because of loyalty. Maybe there's some family connection, but a lot of it is purely because it's in their own economic interest. That they stick with the crime lord because he has made them a lot of money. That as long as he gets his cut, but he helps get them protection, he helps get them leads, he helps get them jobs, what they need to do. So it's, he says, but if he's not providing that, you'll switch allegiance to someone else and you may be willingly going off him. Not a problem. You look at the examples in crime syndicates, Gotti and all the others about who killed who, and you see that all the time. And they're definitely lawful people, and you'd put them, they're not good, they're murderers, they're thugs, they go in there. So what happens is that the concept of prohibiting that kind of competition, that kind of challenge in Dungeons and Dragons or whatever genre, Savage Worlds or whatever, why would you want to stop that? Because that is a fascinating, interesting environment that allows players to interact in different ways than hopefully they act in real life. It allows you to get out those frustrations of, I want to go kill my boss because he's awful. And no, instead you go out and you're playing the game and you take out your frustrations that way, and you don't do that. And it's a much better approach. But you can go play pirates. I mean, who wouldn't want to play a pirate? But those are evil people, let's be honest. They rob, they steal, they murder, they rape. So what happens is that you embrace that. You take that as a dungeon master and you can give them, let the party go where they want to go. If they want to play evil characters, fine. If you've got someone who wants to play, oh no, I'm a paladin and I wouldn't do anything terrible and evil, okay, fine. It's just 3 or 4 of the characters get together and they meet him in a dark alley. The winner is the one who's going to come out. It says what happens is that the paladin's got a lot of advantages, but the other guys, can set up traps, can do terrible things, and maybe off the character. It can create an interesting adventure where you have characters who play too much of a goody two shoes. It says I went through I was alive and playing Dungeons and Dragons when there was this whole flack about Dungeons and Dragons in church groups. I even tried to introduce Dungeons and Dragons into the group I was with in my church, and that didn't work out well. Not for reasons you would expect. I mean, what surprised me was the lack of imagination of some people. And that was a challenge, but I had no problem with people. I saw the Darkest Dungeons and Chick Track and all the other stuff. And what happens is that it doesn't bother me. And I've played evil characters. I've encouraged evil campaigns. I've sit there where one of the ways I played that sort of quote encouraged it was I sit there and I says, tell me, what I want you to tell the party is what your character looks like. Not what class that your character is, but what your character looks like. First off, that allows somebody who is an assassin, and I've had assassins in the game adventures where they're masquerading as a thief, and everybody, it's a thief, but it's actually an assassin masquerading as a thief because they can do that. That's part of their innate skills, and they can, but they don't. They may wait for the best time to backstab. Some of the more interesting games where there was this is playing around a table where everybody's passing notes. You're getting notes coming into to the dungeon master from all the players as they telling you what they're doing that they don't want the other players to know, and the players are passing notes between themselves where they don't want the GM to know what's going on either. So what happens is that it was just total silence, and I collect those notes, and those are always fun to go back and read later. I want to do this, I want to do that. I had one of the fun stories that was there was they had found it's long story I created. It was a staff of green, and imagine a staff of green paint. What happens is you pick up the staff, you point it at something, and go green, and it turns the subject green through and through, all the way through. So if you cut them, they bleed green. It says it turns them green. No other harm, no other distance, but it was just interesting green. So what happens is that the party is out in the woods, and they stumble upon one of the members of the party who has the staff of green. They find a baby lying in a circle of mushrooms, the magical circle like thing, and there's a baby there. Well, what does the character do? Well, he goes out and gets his staff of green, and of course turns the baby green. Then comes back and tells the party, I found this green baby in the forest. That can only happen when the characters are willing to mess up with other characters. And it goes on and on. They do funny things to each other. There's interaction between the characters because they game, they fight, they'll attack common monsters, but they also will willingly backstab the other character if they know it's to their advantage. So they'll go on, and this is an interesting game dynamic that you cut out. If you go, we're only going on quests, our party's going to be neutral or good, we're not going to be evil, we're not going to do evil things. Well, let's be honest. You hear about the village of goblins. I did this in my last campaign, the Tiglath campaign. What happened was, yes, there is a whole village of goblins. And the party goes up, and their first thought is, we're going to decimate this village and kill all the goblins. But as they approach, they find there's a lot of commerce going on between the local villages and the goblin village. The goblins are buying things, the goblins are selling things, the villagers are buying things and selling things, and they actually find that the economy of the local villages is actually dependent upon the goblin community. So going in and killing all the evil, terrible goblins would be an evil act, because you'd be decimating the economy of the local economy of all these villages. They never did find out that the economy of the goblins was based upon trading with someone else, which I'll leave as a surprise for anybody if they ever get down that way. But what happens is that there was a whole interesting, because the goblins were trading pearls. That was a hint and a clue. They were getting lots of pearls. Where were goblins getting pearls? And anyway, but that was what they were buying things with pearls at a very discount rate. So pearls in the economy in that area were much cheaper than normal. But it's the quote, an evil monster is a part of the economy that was there, that they had come up with a niche where they were trading. So, it's as you run into, if you've watched the show Black Sails, you see the fascinating interaction between the pirates would go out, they would capture and plunder a ship, they'd bring it back, and then they would sell it. They'd basically go to the fence, who would sell it, and then would repackage it and ship it back to sell it to legal markets. So you run into that whole interaction when you're dealing with that, because you come in with the group, and they need to buy something. In one of the campaigns that I'm running right now, the characters are just starting out. They've only got a small amount of gold. They go to a secondhand shop, is the best way to describe it, and they start looking through things. Like, they notice that there's some clothing, and the clothing, it's clean, but there are little holes that have been stitched up. They see that, like the one, they find a dress where it's a nice dress. It's been recently cleaned, but in the back there is several cuts that have been recently stitched, like somebody had slipped a blade in and killed the person who'd been wearing the dress. They find the leather, and they look at the leather, and if they'd had luminol and a black light, you would see it glow, because they detect a faint hint of blood. They see a dark stain on the inside of the armor. The person had obviously been bludgeoned to death in their leather armor, and so you find the shop, and so they're there. So is the fence evil? Well, he's just in business selling things and not particularly asking where they come from. He may not actually be responsible for that, but he is definitely not your lawful good type, and definitely not your lawful neutral type. I will argue that he knows that certain things are happening. So what happens? So your characters, when they find things, it allows them to go to fences, to do that. I mean, Grand Theft Auto, how could you play the purpose of Grand Theft Auto is you go out and you steal cars, which is not a lawful act, not a neutral act. You beat up people. That's definitely not a good act. So what happens, and I find these people who try and say, pigeonhole that, but that's really not evil. Then, for me, I've read some interesting stories. If you've ever pulled down, David Drake has a series, I think it's Manhunting Things, or I might have that mixed up, or he wrote another set of stories where it's in the Cthulhu type mythos, and where the description is that the Lovecraftian monsters are true evil, but the characters who are fighting the Lovecraftian monsters are what everybody else would say are evil, because at the end they're torching villages and killing and raping the women in the village, which definitely makes them evil, but they're the good guys because they defeated the worst evil. And so an evil that was much worse than they were. And so you get into interesting dynamics of, just because you're evil characters doesn't mean you have to fight good. You may be fighting a greater evil that is out there, that's much more organized, that's much more sinister and methodical, and trying to do that tends to be more the lawful evil type rather than the chaotic evil. And you'll band together to simply go out and off them. And so you can be fighting great quests to destroy their greater evil, but it's more interesting. A set of books that I highly recommend is The Black Company. And what happens is by Glenn Cook. And he's written some interesting stuff, but The Black Company, the description is the characters are homicidal maniacs. But you run into them, and I've heard Glenn Cook speak at some conventions, and when he described it, he says what he wanted to do when he started The Black Company was tell Lord of the Rings from the point of view of the orcs. And it's not quite that bad, but it's interesting, and you run into the group of characters who are truly interesting and fascinating, and they have, to me, that they're very lifelike characters, but you wouldn't want to even share a cup of tea with them or a cup of coffee, because these guys would easily kill you for the change in your pocket. The doctor is called Croaker because, the question comes up, is the guy's hurt? Do you actually heal him, or do you off him and put him out of his misery? That's something that is also fascinating to discuss is, well, when do you heal things? I created a character in my Tiglath campaign, and I wrote sort of a blog post about him. And imagine it's a group of soldiers going out, and you're on the trail of a child molester. And so what happens is that he kidnaps young children, and he abuses them, and then he tortures and then kills them. So this group comes along, and the young lieutenant he's real proud to lead this group, and they go out there and they find the child molester, and the commanding officer gives the lieutenant the privilege of executing the child molester. And the lieutenant then goes up and puts the prisoner out of his misery, puts him to death in a gruesome way, but he does that and he's proud of that. And then the officer says, we have no healers, and we've got this little girl over here who's been terribly abused. She's going to suffer for the next hours or days while we try and get back to town, and you have to put her out of her misery too. And it's an act of compassion, but many people would say it's an evil act. But you look at it and you go, do you let something suffer, even if it's a young girl who's been terribly hurt? So what happens is that I wrote in the blog, it was about him reminiscing about the fact, he says he was so proud, and how it pulled all the pride out of him, where he has to go over and kill this little girl as an act of mercy. So, but what happens is, this is where you get the multifaceted characters when you allow evil into your players. Let them play evil. I mean, that would affect anyone. You have to put something down. I mean, I've seen things where animals have had to be put down, things like that. It's rough. It's heart-rendering when something that you care about is hurt, and that you have to put it down, because you can't heal it. That it's even with today's modern medicine, there are things that can't be solved. And what happens is that with evil, it can turn the characters so that they may enjoy that. You get Luca Brasi in The Godfather. If you've read the book is he's even a much more evil character than what is there, but he's a very powerful character where he's a very powerful asset of the Dawn, and he goes out and does what the Dawn needs him to do, to kill people. He's a murderer. He's not very bright, but he's very loyal because he owes a lot to the Godfather, and he does that. So embrace the dark side. Be like, in the Empire Strikes Back, join with me and we can rule the Empire. But what happens is the Dungeon Master embrace the dark side. Let the characters, if they want to off themselves, it's not going to, if it's done well, and, maybe there's some hostility between characters and fighting. And I tell people, I did a total party kill as a player. And I did. That's a whole other story. But I was in a campaign and somebody kept trying to kill my character, so I reacted, and it didn't work out the way I'd planned, but it offed the entire party. And including me, but retribution is hell. But so what happens is that you have to embrace that. Let the characters play evil characters. Why not? Why do you restrict your options? He says, now, if it offends you, okay, I can understand that. But if you're a little bit more open-minded, if you're willing to, you have no problem with playing games like Fiasco or some of the other games that are out there, and if you enjoy movies like The Sopranos or The Breaking Bad or The Godfather or Black Sails or even House of Cards, why do you prohibit characters? Why would you even want to prohibit characters from being evil like those characters are evil in your adventure? Those are something that you would think that you'd want to emulate. So have fun and be evil.